Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitani rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Many greetings to you all, citizens of planet Earth, and in particular, citizens of the continent of Africa. I want to talk to you today about the situation in Nigeria. President Trump is threatening a vicious military strike on the one country of Nigeria. I wonder why. What is the real reason? He claims that it is because the Nigerian government is standing by and letting Christians to be killed. If that were the reason, I think Donald Trump would have demonstrated his willingness to save human lives by intervening in Palestine to prevent the massacre of Palestinians by the Israeli army. He would have intervened in Russia, or in Ukraine rather, to bring peace between Russia and Ukraine and stop the massacre of many Ukrainians. So that alone enables you to see that the situation of Nigeria is comparable not to Palestine or Ukraine, but to the situation in Venezuela. In order to be able to understand what the dynamics of the situation is, let us see how in the past, when the Africans were purely subjected to all the different forms of slavery, that is physical slavery, mental slavery, psychological slavery, economic slavery, cultural slavery, academic slavery, linguistic slavery, spiritual slavery, and so on, how were they usually treated? They were usually given orders to do or implement a particular policy, and if they didn't do it, they were threatened with either the vilification of their political regime, in other words, they start saying they are against human rights, they are not democratic, and so on, something which is ridiculous because neither America nor the Western Europe is really democratic. Or they might be white-mailed, using the amount of money they must have illegally taken out of the country into their private bank accounts in the West. When I say white-mail, I'm using that word in the place of where others would use blackmail, because that is another one of the methods which is used to downgrade the black race by connoting or attributing the black color to everything which is bad. So that's why I coined the word white-mail instead of blackmail. Or they might corrupt them directly, or perhaps provide contributions to certain NGOs or companies in which they know the president has got shares or major shares. They might threaten them with compromising video footages which show them doing things which one shouldn't be doing. Or they might threaten to destabilize their government by financing either political, civil, or religious organizations which will either oppose the government or are likely to carry out acts which can be used to justify sanctions, military actions, or other actions like making the country to go to war with its neighbors or to have some kind of internal military movement, thus destabilizing the country. Now, so if Nigeria is being threatened directly, it means that these methods I just mentioned haven't been effective with them. Congratulations, Nigeria. So what has Nigeria done which the American oligarchs don't like? Well, The Nigerians have demonstrated recently that they are willing to actually live and benefit from their full sovereignty. Sovereignty over their political system, sovereignty over their assets and natural resources, sovereignty over all things related to the nation as a whole. And that is why they have constantly refused to allow America to install military bases in Nigeria. They are a potential engine for Africa. They are a potential engine for Africa. And that is not good, because someone else in the past, Muammar Gaddafi, tried to create a Pan-African gold-backed currency and an African Development Bank, and he was killed brutally, pretending to be fighting for democracy, or the usual lies which the world at the time was willing to swallow. Nigeria, the third thing which Nigeria has done is that when the Americans blew up the pipeline, the Russian pipeline, under the sea and caused shortage of gas in Europe, the Americans were expecting the Nigerians to just allow them to come and freely take the Nigerian gas, which is a huge reserve, and compensate for the Russian gas which is coming from Russia. But the Nigerians wanted to act and use the situation to get an advantage for their national interests. That too, Washington didn't like. When the Americans wanted all the nations of the world to vote to condemn Russia for the activities in Ukraine, they expected Nigeria to just do as they were told. But Nigeria decided to abstain, saying to themselves, these guys lied about Iraq. They lied about Afghanistan. Why should we think they're telling the truth now? And the Nigerians have been working with the Kenyans and South Africans to have a common policy from Africa. Now, the other thing which Nigeria has done, which is again very serious in the eyes of Washington, is that they started selling their petroleum products, crude oil, to be paid with other than the US dollar. Saddam Hussein was killed because of that. He started selling petroleum and received payments in euros. You see, why is that important? Because since Henry Kissinger introduced the Petrodollar system, which involves selling petroleum only for American dollars, since the Americans made the gold-backed dollar to collapse because of excessive printing of dollars without any gold backing, they decided to scrap the gold-backed currency, which was negotiated in Bretton Woods in the 1944 or 45 years, and introduced a fiat currency. And for the fiat currency to work and allow America to just continue to harvest the world, what I mean is they just print dollars and go and use it. They have to create an artificially high demand for dollars. And petroleum being such an important product in the world, they decided to use petroleum as that product and negotiated with the Arabs in the 1970s. Henry Kissinger is the one who did the negotiation, that the Arabs are going to sell their petroleum in return only for American dollars. And they will use the excess dollars which they receive to invest in US Treasury bonds. The interest from these bonds will be used to build their countries to the same infrastructural level as America. So that created a very high demand for dollars, and all the Americans had to do then was to just sit back, print dollars and go and use, and that is why you hear that the American debt today is in the tens of trillions of dollars. They're never going to pay that debt. It simply means that's the amount of money they have printed without justification for the rest of the world to work, hand over their resources, provide services to America. Nigeria has also engaged very strongly with BRICS and the European nations, because many European nations themselves are tired of American hegemony. And the Americans, when they were threatened with vicious military action, they didn't cave in, but they are fighting back diplomatically. We must admit, however, that Nigeria has a certain weakness. One of the weaknesses of Nigeria is that in the southeast region of Nigeria, there is a secessionist movement promoted by some Biafra who want to create a separate state from Nigeria. It started a long time ago, pushed by certain petroleum companies who discovered there was petroleum there, and they will finance certain local movements headed at the time by Ojukwu, to try and create a separate state out of that, so that those people could benefit from the petroleum resources without having to share with the rest of the nation. So that movement, although heavily suppressed, is still existing. The Nigerians also have a problem in the north. In the north, the desert is spreading, and some of the shepherds, those who are having cattle, are having to move further and further south, and that is creating some confrontation with some of the people who are already living in those areas. So Nigeria will have to find a way to contain those weaknesses so that they should not be used by Washington to destabilize them. This act of Washington is just an act indicating the death of an old empire, because the American empire is falling, and it is to be replaced by the Chinese empire, because the controllers of the world know that the world does not usually accept the hegemony of one civilization for more than 70 or 75 years. So they had already decided that the American civilization hegemony was going to be replaced by the Chinese hegemony, and that's what justified the rapid technological advancement of China. Nigeria, a country of more than 250 million people, predominantly young population, has got oil resources. I think they produce more than 2 million barrels of petroleum a day. They've got mineral resources, agricultural resources, huge amounts of gas. And they are also a gateway to a market of more than 100 million in the rest of West Africa. Now, Boko Haram in the north, what is that all about? That is one of the pretexts which Washington is trying to use in order to attack Nigeria. Now, Boko Haram has been in Nigeria since the British colonialism period. Before the British came to Nigeria, those who were slightly more advanced than the rest of the population were the northern population, who were Muslim, who already knew the art of writing. They were writing using the Arabic script. They also had a well-established administration under the Lamido system, a very well-established judiciary system based on the Islamic Sharia. And the people in the south were basically still in the primitive African system, which itself was advanced, but not as well structured and codified as what was going on in the north. When the British came and stopped the rapid expansion of Usman Dan Fodio, who wanted to spread this system all through the country, they brought their own system. And this system involved a broader scope of types of knowledge. As you know, Islamic knowledge includes everything from mathematics and chemistry to fiqh and sharia and so on. But unfortunately, for some reason, in order to bring down Islam, they have reinterpreted in history to try and reduce Islamic knowledge to just theological knowledge and knowledge of ritual. And so the scholars who were existing at the time in northern Nigeria knew about religious knowledge and ritual. How to pray, what invalidates prayer, what kind of ram to sacrifice, how do you do your ritual bath, and things of that nature. They were respected, though, as scholars, as people who knew. Now, when the British came and brought other types of knowledge, like chemistry and so on, here they stood in the position of weakness. They had to acknowledge to the population that there were many other things they did not know. If they were humble enough, they would have taken the time to learn the mathematics and chemistry and so on and add to what they had and would have kept their position. But instead, they decided to call that knowledge fake knowledge. And in their Hausa language, which they were speaking at the time, fake knowledge was said, Ilimin Boko. The word Boko means fake. Ilumi is knowledge, which is borrowed from Arabic. They called it Ilimin Boko in order to discourage their population from acquiring it, and as a way of saying that that knowledge which the British came with is not important, and only what their knowledge of how to pray and so on is important. They thought by doing that they would continue to be the center of society and stay in power. Now, mostly people in the south, the Biafra and so on, did not quite heed to that warning, and that is why up till today, most of the modern knowledge have been acquired more by the people of the south than those in the north. So if you want to count the number of medical doctors, engineers, and so on, you're going to find that there are more of them, proportionally speaking, in the south than in the north. But that notwithstanding, they had their movement, which was something which was spreading by word of mouth in society. There was no political pressure, there was no political dimension, no military dimension, nothing. And it went on like that until independence, until we came close to the 80s. Now, certain things started to happen. People started to seeing the dynamic and industrious nature of Nigeria, and some Western circles were even willing to conclude that if we don't do something like destabilizing Nigeria, within 20 years, if Nigeria is left alone, there will be more than Japan. So we have to do something to destabilize Nigeria. Now, to make things worse, Nigeria actually evolved to become the biggest economy in Africa, surpassing South Africa. Now, the last straw which broke the camel's back came when Gaddafi made a study of natural resources in Africa through a certain German company and using satellites, and found out that the northeast region of Nigeria, that is the Maiduguri region, contained a large amount of a certain mineral called rhodium, certain metal called rhodium, which is, I think, 200 euros a gram. In other words, if you have a single kilogram of it in your pocket, that single kilogram can be worth 200,000 euros, which is about 130 million francs CFA. That makes it even more expensive than gold. Now, so he called on the Nigerian government to send somebody to come and get all the necessary maps and everything. And they sent a certain military officer called Hamza al-Mustafa to go to Libya, collect this information. When he came back, unfortunately, the government tried to, since the population did not yet know anything, they tried to use it for themselves, but Hamza al-Mustafa opposed and he was jailed. And later on, they now realized in order to exploit this thing without any oversight, without having to pay taxes to any government or whatever, it might be better that there is not a well-established political system functioning. So all they had to do now was to provide arms to those who were saying Boko Haram, to enable them to really express themselves very well. So they were given arms. And the movement, the killings, started financed by Washington. Let us be very clear. Washington financed Boko Haram, they financed Al-Qaeda. The Senate made a hearing recently where that was admitted. They even gave the number of millions of dollars which were used to finance those operations. So they financed this movement, and they've been doing a lot of trouble ever since. I'd like to say here that even the young people who go and blow themselves up or go and blow up churches and so on, it's quite possible that they themselves are victims because they are given certain substances to ingest. They are controlled with electromagnetic broadcasts from telecommunication towers. They might be put in contact with a certain substance called black goo, which is used to influence the consciousness of people and lower their vibration and make them to be heartless in their actions. We'll talk about the black goo later on. It is a substance which is very, very well known all over the world. And there are certain places in the world where it is found. And these places are usually the cause for wars all over the place because of their presence. You can find the black goo comes in two forms. You have the positive black goo, which is usually about 10 kilometers underground, but you can have a place where you can find it near the surface, that is in the Gulf of Mexico. But you have the negative black goo, which is what the controllers of the world look for. And you can find that in the Malvinas or the Falkland Islands. You can find it in the eastern part of Ukraine, in Crimea, in northern Iraq. And by the way, northern Iraq also there was a Stargate, which indicates why the Americans went to war there. In Syria, in eastern Iran, in south Yemen, you can find negative black goo there. You can find it in territorial waters of Oman, in the lower areas of Afghanistan, in northern Ireland, in the southern Bahamas, territorial waters, and territorial waters of Venezuela, in the central coast of Alaska, several islands of the South Atlantic, including Falkland Islands, Georgia, Sandwich Islands, and the South African region, including Antarctica. You also have large quantities in Paraguay, like I said, and Antarctica. You will notice that most of these places are conflict zones. And this negative black goo is one of the reasons why there's so much struggle to dominate this area. So, I'll advise the government of countries where those people are operating to try and investigate and see in what form substances are given to those children to make them to go and be carrying out such hideous actions, rather than just think you can solve the problem militarily. Treat them like drug addicts. When you have a drug problem in your country, you don't just start killing the addicts, but you look for the drug traffickers, because those are the people who are to be killed. Do the same with Boko Haram. There are many institutions, especially military institutions in America and financial institutions, which stand to benefit in case of any military action. And they will be pushing for war. We should also understand that one of the reasons why Washington is not happy with Nigeria is because one of the sons of Nigeria, a man called Dangote, recently constructed a refinery which can produce up to 650,000 barrels of petroleum per day. And he has plans to double the capacity. Now, they used to sell petroleum in the past for cents and then buy petroleum products for dollars. But with the presence of the refinery now, the profits are no longer going to go to Chevron, Texaco, Exxon, Mobil, and so on. They're going to go to local African interests. What's worse, Dangote did this using African engineers. He did not contract it to some Western companies. Now, that will make Washington not to be happy. Since we're looking for solutions, what is the mechanism which can be used to vilify and make these young children to do what they're doing? I just explained that the desert is spreading. And those who have got cattle have problems finding where to make their cattle to graze. So they're moving further south. And further south, you have other people who already are farming there. So that creates a problem. Now, under those circumstances, what is likely going to happen? A conflict between the cattle raiders and those who are cultivating the land. And when that happens, then pretexts will be used by one to remove the other. And if the people who are rearing cattle, who generally might be of the Fulani race, because that is predominantly their action, if they are the Fulani, most of them are Muslim. And those who are carrying out agriculture usually might be some other race, among them Christians who are settled in those areas. Then you can imagine a situation where the clerics who downplay the value of the life of the one who is not Muslim so that they can be expropriated from the land and the cattle graders take their place. The cleric who can make a rhetoric which makes the person who does that to still appear a good man in society will be generously treated. So, it's very important for the Nigerian government and other governments to find out what kind of ideology is being propagated among the population. And we should understand that it is an issue of struggle for land. It has nothing to do with religion. But of course, if those who are trying to expropriate are Fulani Muslims, and those who have settled are Christians, very quickly it can be marketed, it can be promoted as a religious problem. Just like you had a problem between Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland, because the two communities were of a different political divide concerning the position of Northern Ireland. Should it be part of Britain? Should it be independent or join the rest of Ireland? Those who supported one position tended to be of one religion, and those who supported the opposite view tended to be of another religion. And those two factors enabled people to start saying there was a war between the Catholics and the Protestants in Northern Ireland. There wasn't. It was a political problem which came out that way. We must not allow America to destabilize Nigeria, because the consequences will spread all over Africa. Look at the other places they went and solved the democratic problem, in quotes. They went to Iraq. Iraq is still in shambles up till today. They went to solve the democratic problem in Libya. Where is Libya today? They went to Syria. Where is Syria today? They went and solved the problem in Sudan. Where is Sudan today? That is what is going to happen if they are allowed to get into Nigeria. They've tried to use their media to tarnish Nigeria and make it appear to be a failed state with corruption and all kinds of things. But that is not working out. They even did a terrorist action by sending a malware which would have destroyed and created a huge catastrophe in a newly built refinery. But the African engineers went onto manual mode, stopping all automation, prevented the catastrophe from happening, and then investigated, and within hours they were able to identify the malware, which clearly had a signature of a 3-letter Western agency. You see? They wanted to cause problems, cause an explosion or something, and then come and create a mess, and that would have been put under the explanation of African incompetence. We need all other African countries to take the example of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, who have clearly stated that they do not kick out the imperialists to watch it destroy their neighbor. So any attack on Nigeria will be an attack on them. We expect other countries like Cameroon, Kenya, South Africa to make similar statements and even send battalions, symbolically, of soldiers to Nigeria in order to highlight African unity. When crude oil was being exported without refining, so that the profits for refineries could go to Western companies, nobody saw killings of Christians. Boko Haram has desecrated more than 83 churches, but also 72 mosques. They've killed more than 1,500 Christians and more than 2,000 Muslims. So it is not a movement of religious purity. It is just a movement of destabilization. The head of the Muslims in Nigeria, as well as the president of the Christian Union of Nigeria, the Sultan of Sokoto, and the president of the Christian Union of Nigeria, made a joint statement explaining clearly that they know that this is a trap and they are not going to fall into this trap. Africa, which has been known for a cheap source of raw materials, is now waking up to exercise her sovereignty and make proper use of her own resources. And that is why there is all this attempt to prevent them from doing that. It is an industrial awakening. It is a movement which is indicating freedom from slavery. Now, the other places which were attacked by America, like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, it is clear that it was not for the reasons they said it was. So we must not fall for the lies which are being mentioned by Donald Trump, but sustain and support Nigeria to keep its head up against this type of assault, and let Africa go forward and be united in its actions. That's all I have for today. And I look forward to seeing a positive action from the part of Africans all over. To summarize, the threat made by Donald Trump to Nigeria has nothing to do with the killing of Christians, because if that was the case, we'll say Trump first go and stop the killing in Palestine. It has nothing to do with democracy, because we've seen countries which are not at all democratic, but as long as they collaborate with Washington, everything is fine. One of them, classic example, is Saudi Arabia. So all their talk of democracy is all BS. It has nothing to do with like the love for the Christians. If those Christians think that they love them so much, let them go to the American embassy tomorrow and ask for a visa to go to America and see how they're going to be treated. It is to do with Washington's anger that Nigeria is no longer willing to just allow them to go come and take the resources as they want and dictate to the Nigerian government what policy, international foreign policy and local economic policy to have in their country. Washington wants to dictate to them how they sell their petroleum, in what currency they sell, and for how much they sell. And Nigeria is saying clearly, like the President Tinubu said to Washington, that our sovereignty is non-negotiable. And that angers Washington. And like as usual, they will not come and say that it's because of that. They will create some fake, false pretexts and even create false flag events like 11th September, which was a false flag effect. Had nothing to do with the Muslims, was mounted by 3-letter agencies in America. They will create something like that and then use that as a pretext to come and attack poor people and cause a lot of deaths, as they have done in Libya, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Sudan, and so on. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us, help Africa, and give freedom to all the people of the world. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.